later on in the week on Wednesday and on Thursday. So if there are any any questions that might have arisen from Sunday or from last week, feel free to mention them. And of course, if something comes up as we're in our discussion, don't hesitate to mention them. But we are still in this portion of the book that's looking at the Sermon on the Mount, and we have a very small bit to finish up in the section that Bonhoeffer entitles Truthfulness, which covers Matthew 5:33 through 37. You've heard it say from ancient times, you can swear falsely. I do not swear by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by earth, for it's God's footstool. And then ending up with let your yes, yes, yet let your word be yes, yes, or no, no. Anything more than this comes from the evil one. Um, and so here Bonhoeffer trying to drive home the point that complete truthfulness is the expectation of the disciple. That when we answer the call to follow Jesus, and Jesus becomes our sole focus and goal, then Jesus demands and expects complete truthfulness. Um, and and even in terms of oaths that the reformers, the Lutherans, saw as being necessary within the civic realm, courts of law and things like that, legal situations, that Bonhoeffer doesn't really apply in terms of the disciple, in terms of those who are have accepted the call to Jesus, that there's no need for an oath, as he said, hearkening back to to some of the Greek and Roman philosophers, saying that you know people, and of course during that time men of high standing, of good character, of integrity, didn't need to make an oath because what they said was true. That they didn't have to swear by anything because, similar to what Jesus says, their yes meant yes and their no meant no. They were very truthful, and their integrity, and the character, and at least the understanding there was impeccable. So they didn't need to make oaths. Um, and likewise, Jesus is saying that oaths aren't necessary unless lying is a possibility. And then Bonhoeffer goes even further to say, well, if you need to make an oath for anything, then that calls into question everything that you would say. So now you haven't made an oath. So does that mean that you're now not telling the truth? Um, and so, Bonhoeffer is, really trying to make the point um, that since we are, in our discipleship, fully transparent to Jesus, and we want to do everything for the sake of following Jesus. We're transparent to God. God knows everything. We're transparent to Jesus. We're forthcoming in everything with Jesus. And therefore, as he says, at the top of page 101, nothing, we conceal nothing from our God, from our Lord. Um, and so we live an unveiled life before him. But that happens because that Jesus has revealed himself to us. It's not that we go and we say, "Oh, Jesus, here is everything. I reveal myself to you," but we are known because Jesus has made himself known to us. Um, and so also there is that piece of the sinfulness that is included or that is part of our revelation to God. And so if we're truthful about who we are to Jesus, if we're willing to be fully transparent to Jesus, as if we could hide, but I mean, sometimes we even try to hide things from ourselves. So it doesn't stop us from trying. But when we're tired of trying, or we give up trying to hide things, and we're transparent to Jesus, then the expectation is we're going to be truthful in all things, not simply truthful to Jesus and in this relationship that we have with Jesus, but also truthful in everything. Um, and so complete truthfulness emerges only from sin that is unveiled and forgiven by Jesus. Um, so we can't really be fully truthful unless we are willing to repent and accept Jesus's forgiveness. Um, you know, you know, you know, confess our sins. Um, be truthful about the shortcomings that we have, the things that we've done, the errant thoughts that we have. All of those things, be open and honest about those, and then fully receive the forgiveness that Jesus has given us through his death and resurrection and ascension. And now, then we move forward as able to, or desiring to, maybe even more importantly, desiring to be truthful in all things. Um, and so, um, this, of course, all goes back to the cross for Bonhoeffer, and it all goes back to, kind of the beginning argument of costly grace, that that through the sacrifice of the cross, um, and us being under the cross and kind of coming into this relationship with Jesus through the cross, where uh, sin and death are abolished, now we can we don't have to use oaths, um, and and because everything exists in this perfect truth of God. So our goal, desire to follow Jesus closely, to please Jesus, and then thereby please God. Another step in that is to for our complete truthfulness. Um, Now in this next section, you know, Bonhoeffer does kind of bring up some of the question that I believe was brought up kind of toward the end last week of forgiveness. So what does it mean, to be a follower of Jesus, to be a disciple, to claim that we are following Jesus as disciples, but knowing that, we do falter, we do fall, we do make mistakes, we do, and sometimes willfully and sometimes ignorantly. So where is God's grace and forgiveness and all of that? And so, unless there are particular questions about truthfulness, we'll move on to the next portion that we again touched on a little bit, just really in passing. Then this section, the begin at the bottom of page 101, that Bonhoeffer calls retribution. So pause there for a second. If there are any comments, questions, concerns, need for clarification, anything? Excuse me. Okay. So this and another way, one thing that we haven't talked about explicitly a lot in this discussion, is that, even though Bonhoeffer makes the case that we're called individually, so, Jesus comes to us as an individual. We say yes to Jesus as an individual. And in many ways, we have isolated ourselves by this focus on Jesus, but we're called into community with other disciples. And so much of the Sermon on the Mount is really focused on using the law, and the commandments and all that is. And from from their initial and original hope and focus to create a community of justice and of equity and a community that proclaims to the world something about what God intends for people. And so, if we're transgressing any of the commandments, whether we're talking about the Ten Commandments uh, of the Old Covenant, or whether we're talking about this kind of recasting of the covenant by Jesus here at the Sermon on the Mount, um, the aside from the discipleship, aside from following Jesus, we're building in community and protecting community, and if we're lying, that breaks down community, as Bonhoeffer said at the end. If we're too focused on retribution, too focused on getting even, too focused on an eye for an eye, that wrecks community. So again, it's kind of looking at all of these in terms of, okay, what does it take to build and preserve and nurture a strong community that sees everyone as equal, as worthy, that none are discardable or are worthless or even worth less in kind of the classic sense, not worth anything or worth less than anyone else. That these communities are, for lack of a better term, utopias. They really are intended to be the kind of experience where people come into and this will sound, kind of naive and silly maybe even, but they're really loved into the fullness of who they are. They're not commanded into that fullness. They're not scared into the fullness. They're not, threatened into the fullness of who they are. Uh, but they're loved into that. And communities that protect one another, communities that, again, what we'll talk about here, that call out evil for evil without having to fight against it. Um, you know, communities that speak truth to power, not only truth outside of the community, but within the community. Um, Create, and of course, it's over time because we're not used to living in these kinds of communities. But over time, it forms this kind of indestructible bond, um, that and it's not that it's not susceptible to injury or attack. That's not how how it's created or how it even sustains itself. But the bond between the people that are in it, the fierce protection of one another, the very straightforward communication, the support that people need to be able to stay focused on Jesus. All of those things are hallmarks of these kinds of communities that are called to follow Jesus. Uh-huh. Yes.
I'm kind of listening to based on what I've read. Is he asking for us to be silent on a no condition?
No, not silent. No, and we'll get to that here in a minute. No, not silent at all. Not in any
Okay.
way, shape. Mm-mm. Not at all. Mm-mm. No,
Okay.
not at all. Definitely not that.
Mhm.
So yeah, so we'll this Matthew 5:38 through 42. You've heard it said that it was said an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the second mile. Give to everyone who begs from you, and do not refuse anyone who wants to borrow from you. Again, this is Matthew 5, verses 38 through 42. Um, and so now, as probably all of us have been taught and have learned, that Jesus, in these statements, you have heard it said, but I say to you, that Jesus is discarding the covenant, the old covenant, quote unquote. But Bonhoeffer has made the case, and and scholars have begun to come around to this, prior to Bonhoeffer, and and even to our day, that Jesus isn't so much discarding the covenant, but refining it or refocusing it, reminding people of why the covenant was in place in the first place, giving people a clear understanding of how the covenant has gotten kind of muddled, of how it's been used to separate people, to push people away, even while it's been used to set the nation of Israel apart. And it's been set up or propped up as some sort of protection for the people of Israel. But Jesus is saying that that's not really the point of the law, not really the point of the commandments. And so it's this refocusing of the commandments. It's this refocusing of the interpretation of what it means to be a follower of God. And of course, for Bonhoeffer, the way we Gentiles get into that relationship with God is through Jesus. And so at the first point, the rule an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, that we know from the Deuteronomic law, that Moses elaborated in Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, that says that's this eye for an eye, it's retributive justice. You do this, this is what happens to you. You kill, you're killed. Um, you know, you steal, and there's retribution that comes to you. You bear false witness, you disrespect your parents, all of the you covet, all of these things have in them, a retributive a consequence. And Jesus is saying, um, but I say to you something different, or I am helping you to see what God was trying to get at with that, or where it can go wrong, and how we refocus it on what God really intends. Now, Bonhoeffer says he recognizes Jesus, thus recognizes the rule as a valid commandment of God, just as much as that prohibition. And in that case, it is not to be abolished, but fulfilled completely. Jesus does not elevate the Ten Commandments or above other Old Testament commandments as we once did. Um, for him, the commandment of the Old Testament is one, and he directs his disciples to obey it. So again, he's not saying, okay, now that I'm here, now the new covenant is in place, so you don't have to do any of that. He's saying, no, you do need to do it, but you need to fulfill it completely. And if you're going to do that, then that is the expectation. Jesus said in other places, um, if you break one tenet of the law, then you've broken it all. Your righteousness has to, be at least as good, if not exceed that of the Pharisees, because again, it's important to pay attention to what God is saying. Now, the application and the practice is where we kind of get muddled. And so Jesus here, again, is trying to refocus us on what God really intends. And so this first line in that second paragraph, in some ways is the hardest statement that he's made, even though he's made it before. Bonhoeffer says Jesus' followers renounce their own rights for his sake. Now, that brings up a huge question, similar to what Mrs. Curtis said. What, we just supposed to shut up? We just supposed to be silent, not say anything when things are done to us, when things are done to other people. And that could be, and it often has been an interpretation has been misused, to keep, the oppressed in place. Whether it's women, whether it's slaves, whether think of the second class in any society in any epoch of human history, that has had these scriptures, and yeah, well, just don't say anything. Jesus was like like a lamb before the shearer, didn't open his mouth. Don't do anything. Just bide your time, and God will reward you. And so we kind of have resonances at here, but here it's Jesus' followers renounce their own rights, not to keep the peace, not to follow the rules, but renounce their own rights for Christ's sake. Um, and going back to the beginning, he blesses the meek. If after they have given up everything else for the sake of his community, the desire to hold fast to this one possession, they would have abandoned discipleship. Therefore, this is nothing more than an expansion of the beatitude. Jesus' retribution, just retribution should do away with injustice and give proof to the disciples following Jesus. Just retribution takes place only in not resisting it. And so Bonhoeffer is laying really heavily on this turn the other cheek piece, on this, that if the full force of what the gospel is saying, the full force of following Jesus is by resisting the temptation to go for revenge and retribution, to return evil for evil. And now for the community of disciples, the only allegiance that they have is to Jesus. It's not about, region of the world, ethnicity, political persuasion, religious persuasion. It's only Jesus. And so, um, we bear the blow, he says, so that evil is not added to evil. And that is the only way community can be established and preserved. So again, all of this is about creating community. Now, now Jesus, he goes on to say, and we might get to it. Jesus calls evil evil. Jesus doesn't mince words. When evil is being done, he calls it evil. He's not silent, doesn't, turn a blind eye. He says this isn't right. But the reaction to it is the key. And so for Bonhoeffer's interpretation here of what Jesus is saying is that, we don't render evil for evil, as it were. We don't create more evil in our desire to vanquish evil. Um, we don't participate in the same kind of activity that was done to us, because that's what evil wants. Because Bonhoeffer goes on to say a little later, that evil's goal is to create more evil. That the goal of evil is not simply to do bad things to people; it's to fundamentally change the person into the same thing that they have been, the same that to treat others the same way that they have been treated evilly. And so evil wins when we respond in kind. Now, of course, most of us have been raised with a little bit of a how should I say, a caveat to this. Some might have learned, well, you don't go and hit somebody, but if they hit you, you have every right and responsibility to hit them back. You protect yourself. You don't let people walk all over you. You don't let people take advantage of you. All of these things we've learned, either explicitly been taught or have learned through experience. Um, but Bonhoeffer is saying, echoing Jesus, that that the mistreatment that we receive, particularly in terms of the gospel, but across the board, um, that is not for us to respond similarly. Because when we do, yes, that might make us feel good, or we might have protected ourselves, or whatever the case is. But ultimately, that feeds evil, and And we probably all been in situations either where, it might, and we might be the people that like to stir the pot, or when we cause the confusion, we walk away satisfied because now, people that weren't at odds with each other now we're at odds with each other, and that just, that perpetuates the evil, and evil has won. Now, not that we are evil people and, explicitly want evil to be done, but there is a certain satisfaction that evil gives us when we see confusion going on outside us, even if only to say, well, at least I'm not like that. I wouldn't be acting up like that in public. I would never do that. Or we suck our teeth and shake our head and say, "Oh my God, look at this! Look at this here. This is ridiculous. What are they doing?" And then we kind of step into the role of that Pharisee that stood apart in the temple and said, "Well," and looked, sidelong and denigrated the tax collector who was next to him beating his breast. Well, at least I'm not like this tax collector. And so we feel good in some way, shape, or form, looking at other people that aren't doing well, or looking at the retribution that happens, or whatever the case is. And Bonhoeffer is saying that, and it follows with Jesus that those sorts of things just perpetuate and they grow. And evil ultimately wins in those situations. Um, Evil does not find what it is seeking, namely resistance, and therewith new evil, which will inflame it even more. Evil will become powerless when it finds no opposing object, no resistance, but instead is willingly born and suffered. Evil meets an opponent for which it is not a match. Of course, this happens only when the last remnant of resistance is removed, when the urge to retaliate evil with evil is completely renounced. Then evil cannot achieve its goal of creating more evil. It remains alone. Now, this is all of everything that Bonhoeffer is saying. This part, all of it, is much easier said than done. Um, and we kind of touched on last week, that Bonhoeffer is setting up this kind of idealistic, perfect scenario of the disciple and following Jesus. Um, and it almost has the sense that, well, this is the goal that we're shooting for, and we're aiming high, and so we're going to aim sufficiently high that we will, even though we probably won't reach the goal, we'll be much better than we would if we weren't aiming that high. So Bonhoeffer is setting this out. He's not saying it's impossible, but he's setting this out, this high, impossibly high bar of following Jesus, of being transparent to Jesus, of seeing the world through, uh, you know, our whole lives mediated by Jesus, of applying what Jesus is saying in the Sermon on the Mount so explicitly and so literally, as to be this perfect image of the follower of Christ. That if we're aiming that high, aiming for that as the goal, that we'll get closer to what we need to do, even when we don't reach the goal. And so and so you kind of set out this shining object, so to speak, out in front, and you say, okay, this is where we need to get to. And just the goal might encourage people to do more than they had thought they could do, to be better than they thought they could be, to forgive more than they thought they could give, to bear more than they thought they could bear, for the sake of reaching this high goal. Which, if the goal wasn't there, they never would have gotten there. And again, as I said before, and I'm sure we'll say again, in the face of the evil of Nazi Germany, this was how Bonhoeffer thought those that were being trained to be pastors, those who wanted to be conscious believers and disciples, needed to be striving for this level of fidelity to Jesus. Now, again, obviously Bonhoeffer lived some life after this and made some choices that weren't quite in line with what he's saying here. But again, I think that, for Bonhoeffer's context and the people who for whom he wrote this, and for us today, it places in front of us a goal that probably all of us are saying on some level, this is insane. There's no way. Whether we're actively saying, well, I can't do this. I've tried that. It hasn't worked, or whether we're like, I just don't think this is possible, kind of on a generic, general level. The fact of the matter is that asking these questions and putting things out here like this in this form hopefully encourages us to strive for this, that we don't, just kind of say, oh, well, whatever. Or, again, going back to the beginnings, Bonhoeffer saying we don't settle for cheap grace, that we're willing to put in the work to struggle against maybe some of what we've learned before, some of what feels comfortable, some of what we've put into practice already in life, and to have these questions in front of us to say, okay, wait a minute, where is it that I can do better? Where is it that I can resist the temptation to do X, Y, and Z? Where is it that I am able to say, okay, I'm focused on Jesus here, and Jesus is my only goal and object. Therefore, a lot of these other things that had weighed me down or had distracted me are no longer distractions. So that we can realize, something about ourselves that we might not have ever thought was possible, so that we can do more than we have already, or more than we thought was possible, by focusing so intently on Jesus and trying to put into practice the things that Jesus did in the way that Jesus led us, or the way that Jesus shared them with us through the Gospels, and then through the early interpretations of those Gospels, and in Paul's letters, and in other New Testament writings. Um, Check the time. So, so again, there's a willingness, to have everything in Christ, and to follow Him alone. On 104, um, Bonhoeffer goes on to say, our concern here is not only with evil, it is with the person who is evil. Jesus calls the evil person evil. My behavior should not give excuses and justification for those who indulge in violence or who oppress me. Nor do I intend to express my understanding for the rights of an evil person by my patient suffering. Jesus has nothing to do with sentimental considerations. The humiliating blow, the violent deed, and the act of exploitation all remain evil. Disciples are to know this and to give witness to it just as Jesus did, because otherwise the evil person will not be engaged and overcome. A disciple should not resist when challenged by evil that cannot be justified at all. Instead, by suffering, the disciple will bring evil to its end and thus will overcome the evil person. Suffering willingly endured is stronger than evil. It is the death of evil. Now, at the beginning of that paragraph, Bonhoeffer is saying that, it again, to Ms. Curtis's question and comment, it's not that we stay silent. Jesus was very clear, in, okay, you ought not do this. This is wrong. And he said it in different ways, but it was very clear that, these actions are not consonant with the God that you claim to serve, talking to the, Pharisees, Sadducees, and others. Um, so there's that clarity. But on the other side of that, there's also a willingness to bear the assault. So, because willing, as Bonhoeffer is saying, suffering willingly endured is stronger than evil. It is ultimately the death of evil. Now the question obviously, I think, well, maybe not obviously, but one of the questions would be, okay, so how long do I have to suffer? Do I have to suffer and, let somebody kill me? Do I have to suffer? Um, how long do I have to do this? Would be, I think, an obvious question. Or, do I have to wait until, the end of time, for evil to be finally vanquished? And these are questions that all communities, Christian communities or oppressed communities in general have had. Well, how long is this going to have to last? Whether, you were a person born into slavery, in the 17th century, or whether you are find yourself in a situation where you have enemies all around and they keep coming for you. How long, can you bear up under that without breaking or without retaliating? These are all very real questions that Bonhoeffer doesn't answer because again, in the context of Bonhoeffer, he's really pushing the people that are reading this, hearing this, studying this, to say, to figure out, okay, we are in a very dire position with the evil that we see in our government. So what are we going to do about it? How can we overcome it? The behemoth of the Third Reich, the control that Hitler had over most of the sectors of the society. This is, insurmountable. How can we do this? And so Bonhoeffer say, well, the only way we can do this, the only way that we have available to us, because we don't have the political power, we don't have the military power, we don't have the resources. The church has sold out to follow or at least not condemn or push back against Hitler. We don't have any of these things. So what do we have? And Bonhoeffer says, well, we have the Word of God, we have the example of Jesus, and Jesus bore the suffering, but was ultimately the victor. And so, following Jesus, that's our call as well. Um, and it's like I said, much easier said than done. It's very isolating, and all of us have a certain capacity to a certain, strength, level of determination, to bear up under anything without retaliation. Again, this isn't staying silent. This is saying, what you're doing is wrong, what you're doing to me is wrong, all of those things. But it's not from a sense of our own personal rights. It's from a sense of following Jesus, and Jesus was clear, when things weren't going well. It was clear when people were being misused, mistreated, abused. Jesus was clear about all of that. But the reaction or the action afterwards was, to help the people that were being persecuted, to help them bear up under the strain. But also to say, if we're really going to vanquish evil, if we're really going to make a difference in creating a world, creating a society, creating a community that will ultimately vanquish evil, then we have to bear it so that and not respond to it or add fuel to the fire. Um, okay, so I'm gonna pause there because he's gonna go into this how the Reformation, how the reformers tried to deal with this. But I'll pause there for a second and see if there are any excuse me, questions or comments. Okay. So, so the reformers were doing what human beings have done. The reformers said, okay, there are two levels to this. On a personal level, yeah, do what Jesus does. On a personal level, turn the other cheek, go the extra mile, demand your coat, give your cloak as well, all of that. Yeah, personal level, do it. Institutionally, as in your role, your official role as a pastor or whatever the case is, then you have a responsibility not only to speak out but to respond. Um, and and that's the way the reformers try to justify their position on war or of any use of public means to repel evil. Bonhoeffer then goes and say, well, that's not, that was all well and good. That's what they did to make it palatable, so to speak. But it's ultimately a contradiction because no one ever solely acts in an official capacity or in a personal capacity, and so to make that split, it's unrealistic. So to follow Jesus in all things, if there is persecution, if there is evil, you bear up under it. You call a spade, as it were, but you bear up under it and do not respond in kind. Um, and you know, um, um, and so for again for Bonhoeffer in his interpretation of this part of the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, it all comes back to the example that Jesus gave us on the cross, which was, bearing up under the immense evil that was perpetrated on him in terms of the lies that were told, in terms of, the trumped up charges, as it were, in terms of, the mistreatment by the religious elite on the Jewish side, and then the kind of washing the hands, turning a blind eye on the Roman side. Um, and Jesus bore all of that. The physical, the spiritual, the social betrayal, all of that. And so he, as the example, he did all of this at the cross. Therefore, if we're following him, we're doing the same thing. And just as Jesus was vindicated, just as Jesus was given new life, eternal life, just as Jesus was became the victor over death, so we will be declared the victor, or we will overcome the evil that is done to us, the evil that is done in the world, by following the example that Jesus showed us. So only those who there in the cross of Jesus find faith in victory over evil can obey his command. And it is the only kind of obedience which has the promise. Which promise? The promise of community with the cross of Jesus and of community with his victory. So, so if we're following Jesus, and that means we're following Jesus in it all, not just in the shows of power and of healing, not just in the having the support and adulation of the crowd, not just in the power of the miracles and the powerful teaching, but also in the suffering, also in the ridicule, also in the cross. We're following Jesus closely in all of those things. And it's only through that understanding that, that the cross is the place that it really all starts, and where it's not only the place of defeat, but the place of victory as well, that, that we are able to create this community, again, that word community that's going to be coming up a lot. Um, Not a community of the cross, but a community of victory. And again, called in that community, each of us as individuals that have answered the call to discipleship now are forming this community that looks very different from what the world looks like. That proclaims a kind of power that is very different than the power that the world shows. That responds to things differently than the world responds. And so, this community now, ideally at least, is reinforcing these actions, reinforcing this focus, giving people the strength to bear up, because they know that not only are they supported within the community of disciples, but also that they have a strength that comes, ultimately comes from God, and that they're not alone in the sharing of the persecution. And we see this in the Acts of the Apostles, in how, the disciples would be arrested. They would be beaten with rods, whipped, and they would all come back to the community and rejoice because, as the text says, because they were found worthy to suffer for the cross of Christ. Um, yes, that sounds like a ridiculous thing to rejoice in suffering. And yet, that's the model that we have in Jesus, is the model we have in the early, weeks, months, days, years of the church. And it's what, really is our legacy as followers of Christ. It is the promise that we have. And then it really does take on a much different weight when we're part of a community that's going to support us. And frankly, you know, people that are part of the African diaspora, or more specifically, people that are uh, the descendants of enslaved people. Um, Sorry, guess I got kicked out somehow. Well, it's almost time to, but we do have some experience with, suffering together. We do have some experience with knowing what it's like to be supported when we are persecuted in the world. When the society or the people around us, don't see us as worthy of support, or see us as less than whoever they are, whether they're sanctioned by the by the authorities, by the laws, or whether they, have the power over us, authority over us in some other way. It doesn't lessen the sting any, but when we know that there are people that understand what we're going through, to whom we can go back to and receive support, support in terms of, the physical binding up of our wounds, receive support in terms of, the spiritual and social support. And then, it doesn't make it easier, but we do know that we're not going through it alone. And that can mean everything to help us bear up under the things that we have to bear up under, the persecution and evil that is often visited on us. Um, that we're not alone in that, and that's the importance of the community, as importance of having spaces where we can go to and say, "Hey, this is happening to me. This is what I want to do. You know, I want to, lash out. I want to, and have people around us to say, well, hold on. There's another way we can handle this. There's another way that doesn't result in the escalation of the violence. There is a way that doesn't, uh, answer evil for evil, and encouraging us to bide our time, to not react evilly, or for the kind of retribution that the world expects, that will then just perpetuate the evil. But there are those people around us that are helping us to see things differently, and that's the importance of the community of Christ, of the body of Christ. So we know that as we're trying to do this impossible task, following Jesus so closely, that there are those around us that are going to support us and help us through. Um, so I think that really kind of wraps up that section. Um, So when we meet on next week, we'll move into the section on page 107, which is the enemy, the extraordinary, which covers Matthew 5:43 through 48. So if you want to read through Matthew 5:43 through 48, this is a longer section, so hopefully we'll get through it. But it really, um, you know, uh, begins to talk explicitly about love and what love looks like in the context of the discipleship community, the community of disciples, and and how it's lived out according to what Jesus says and according to what the goal of God is. So, thank you all for your time and attention. This is not easy stuff to talk about, but I appreciate the opportunity to do so. We've got about 3 minutes until Compline begins. So for those that are joining us for Compline, welcome. Those that will remain on, we have a few minutes, and those that need to log off, do have a good night and do rest well. But thank you all, and continue to take good care. We'll look forward to being together whenever and however the Spirit allows. God bless everyone.
Thank you,
Thank
Father
you.
Thank you.
Wolfman.
Thank you.
You are welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.